Welcome to episode 3 of the Christopher Hall Training Podcast. In this episode, we're going to be talking about how to go about building core strength and stability. So we're going to explore a few different parts of this topic, but this is just an introduction, so there are going to be more episodes on this which will follow on from this one. So first of all, we're just going to talk about the core and understanding it. What is it? Why is it important? Understanding the difference between core strength and core stability, because that's going to help us understand different types of exercises to be used. Benefits of strong, stable core, some misconceptions of the core and how it works and its anatomy and things like that. And then that will sort of lead into and build on. We're going to be talking about an introduction to core muscles and how they function. And if you want to build your core strength and stability, you can click the link below this video, go through to my How to Build Core Strength and Stability 12-week program, which covers everything that we're going to be talking about in this episode within the program. So we're going to start with the basics of the basics. We're going to go right back to square one and we're going to build out from there. So first of all, understanding the core. What is it and why is it important? So if we look physically at the body and we try to understand what is the core, if you take your arms and your legs off, you are left with your core. Now, we're going to be talking specifically about the abdominal wall. We'll talk about the lats and sort of the upper, mid and lower back, how it all works. And then we've got the hip muscles as well. So you would include within that glute medius, glute minimus, and glute maximus as well. In some respects, you can include the hip flexors, so rectus femoris, psoas, iliacus as well. So that's the core. It's everything from ball and socket joints of the hip to ball and socket joints of the shoulders. Why is it important? Essentially, it's the foundation of your movement. It's there to minimize a risk of injury. I never like to say prevent injury because I don't think you can prevent injury. You can certainly minimize its risk, but I don't think you can prevent it. So why is it important? Well, it helps enhance performance, and that is if you are an athlete doing a sport, or if you are an everyday person and your performance is just everyday life. Lifting shopping bags, opening doors, walking upstairs. It will enhance and improve all of that. So what is it and why is it important is in some respects, it's very simple to explain, but hopefully as we go through this episode and any further episodes, you'll start to get an understanding that, and as I'll come on to in common misconceptions, it's not what, let's just say, mainstream talk about. So if you go online, you probably won't find this type of information sort of interpreted in this way and put together in this way. You may find parts of it, some of the exercises I'm going to talk about, you hear people talk about it, but I don't use them for those reasons. I use them for different reasons, so on and so forth. So what I'm talking about is slightly different, but what I'm trying to do, as we will talk about when we talk about core muscles and the anatomy, is we will start to understand how the body is built, and then what should come out of that as a natural occurrence of simply knowing how the body is built. We will then be able to understand the exercises that we need to do. So it's, in some respects, it's kind of going to be that simple. It's going to be quite logical when we understand about the anatomy, because it will just be like, well, these exercises don't make any sense and these exercises do, just simply by looking at the anatomy and sort of how it's built. So we then come on to, I guess, sort of part 2, and we need to understand, now we understand what the core is and why it's important, we've then got to start looking at what is core strength and what is core stability. Now these, they do need to overlap. They are embedded within each other. So you can't just have core strength and not have core stability, but you can have greater core strength and lesser core stability, if that makes sense. So they're always present. It's just sort of which one you've got. Now, core strength, if we just take strength as a word and we look at its definition, it's the ability of a muscle or group of muscles to apply force. And generally it will say in one repetition. Now, that's when you're doing a regular exercise like a bench press, like a deadlift, like a squat. So basically, it's looking at sort of like a 1 rep max, if you will. Now, when we talk about core strength, if we look at that very initial phase of 1 rep, or simply just being able to get into the position. So if you can get into the plank position and hold it for a short period of time, maybe 5 or 10 seconds, that we will describe as your strength. So you're able to get into that position. What we can then do is expand that on into endurance, which is then the ability to hold that position over a period of time, because the endurance part is in. So we're strong, we can get into the position. Now we need to start thinking about holding it for a period of time. So there's your sort of strength endurance. And most people will have the ability to get into the position, so they will have a degree of core strength. But what we then need to do is add the endurance into it and have the ability to maintain that posture. Well, maintain the position and the posture within that position. Then we come on to stability. Now, stability is slightly different from strength, where strength is the ability to hold the position. Stability is now the timing of the muscle. So what that means is when I lift, so I'm in a plank position, so imagine I'm in a plank position, then I lift my arm from the floor and I put it on my back, like you may have seen me do in other videos. If my hips stay centered and stable and my body doesn't move, my legs don't move, that's my sort of supplementary smaller muscles holding my body in place. That shows that those muscles are timing properly and I've got good stability within them. If, for example, I do the same exercise, I go into the plank, I then go to lift an arm up and my hips rock from one side to the other, or they weight shift, or they drop, or they raise, that's some sort of compensation. So that there is some sort of muscle not timing. And then those muscles need the strength to be able to hold that, which is why I said they're sort of within each other. But first of all, we need the timing of them. Because when I work with people in the gym, I can literally I won't tell them to focus on it. I'll just say, go into a plank position and lift an arm up, because I need sort of like a fair test, if you will. So I just need them to lift their arm up. But if I now say to them, right, now concentrate on keeping the hips still, lift your arm up, there will be significant sort of less movement in the hips. So just by thinking about it, you can create that muscle timing. What you can then do is then you have to build the ability to do it. So you have to build strength and endurance around it. And so that's why they're all working together. So you can have exercises that work them sort of slightly more individually, but essentially they're all not one and the same, but they're all within the same sort of mode of training, if you will. So being stable is essentially it's maintaining a posture, it's smoothness of movement, and it's when additional instability is being put into the exercise, you're still able, as I said, sort of to maintain the posture. If you want to isolate it off more, you can come up into a half kneeling position or up onto one knee. So you're down on one knee, you've got one leg in front of you, and then you literally come onto like a tightrope. So one foot is directly in front of the knee, and then that will make you wobble. Again, the more you wobble, the more unstable, because the muscles are twitching and trying to find balance. The more stable you are, the more smooth that is. There will be some wobble, but it will be a lot more stable. So once we've differentiated core strength, core stability, core endurance, again, we can start to understand exercises that are being chosen. And what hopefully you can start to understand is, if you were to do the 12-week program that's in the link below, you'll start to understand why I've chosen these exercises, why you're making these certain progressions every 2 weeks, because I've built in progressions every 2 weeks, be it reps, sets, time held, or even a progression in the technicalities of the exercise, or the skill level or the hardness of the exercise. So you should, because I'm sort of giving you all the underpinning knowledge of why certain exercises have been chosen over others, and so on and so forth. So that's differentiating core strength, core stability, core endurance. Then we've got the benefits of that strong, stable core, which kind of goes into what we talked about earlier, which is why it's important. But having a strong, stable core, as I mentioned, it's the foundation to movement. So when you go out into everyday life, if you've got that, you're gonna function in everyday life a lot better. If we talk about it in a fitness scenario, you're going to be able to lift more. You're going to be putting less stress on joints, because if you watched my previous episode about a bad back, when you go into a flexed spine, muscles aren't working properly, that puts additional stress on certain aspects of the torso, of the spine. So it concentrates stress. When you're in the neutral posture, it spreads the stress out more evenly. So when you've got a strong, stable core, yes, it's enhancing performance. You're able to lift more. You're able to save energy. It makes you more efficient in movement. It also reduces stress on joints, which is how you then go about minimizing the risk of injury. It can't eliminate the stress on the joints, but it can spread it out. So you're not putting as much, which is, again, why I say if you've got the best posture in the world, but if you overwork certain areas of your body, they're going to wear out because you can't eliminate the stress. You're just going to be spreading it out so you don't fatigue as quickly, so you don't then create an injury as quickly. Now, if you can put together with that proper recovery, then you're going to mitigate that even more, which is how you go from like health training to fitness training to sport specific and performance type training. So there are sort of levels to it. Obviously, the program that I've put together is put together for the health and the fitness sort of level and sort of bridging in from one into the other. So a strong, stable core is going to give you a greater performance and a minimized risk of injury, just because you're not overtaxing the muscles, but you are challenging them and you're putting them into a proper position so they're able to manage those stresses that much more effectively. Now we come on to common misconceptions about core training. Now, we're going to talk a lot about certain exercises, or an umbrella term that I tend to use, which is spine bending exercises. Now, again, this is something that people question a lot. People question me about it. But as I've sort of alluded to, what I'm teaching is a completely different paradigm to what other people are teaching. So they're not even on the same, they're not even in the same space as I am. So they're trying to bring, let's just say, like the mainstream style of training into a different style. And it's like, no, that doesn't fit in here, because we're using biomechanics of the spine as a foundation. What a lot of mainstream core training is doing is taking bodybuilding principles, or if you go a step further, a reductionist view of the body or of training. So if you look at the two opposing philosophies, if you will, you've got a reductionist and you've got a holistic. So reductionist, this goes, basically, we look at the body, we break it down into its component parts, i.e. the muscles. We break it down and then we look at, okay, what movement do they do? Okay, I need to train that movement. So for the deltoid in the shoulder, it goes out to the side, that's a lateral raise. It comes up to the front, that's a front raise. It goes backwards, that's a reverse fly. So there's the three sort of heads of the deltoid, as you call it. Or arm training, you've got bicep here, so we've got the bicep curl, and then you've got triceps as you extend. Then you've got the different heads of the biceps, so you put in these like the hammer curl and the concentration. So you start to see the variations based on this reductionist view of how the body works. And what a lot of core training is doing, it's taking that principle. So rectus abdominis, what does that do? Well, that brings the rib cage towards the pelvis. So therefore, I have to do sit-ups and crunches to be able to do that. Then they look at the obliques. Well, what do the obliques do? Well, the obliques rotate. Well, okay, what I then need to do is do a Russian twist and rotate the spine. QL. Okay, what is the QL? Or the QL has the ability to contract one side and lengthen the other side. So that's a side bend. Then you've got back extensions. What do? They extend the spine. So I need to do back extensions. So what they're doing is they're breaking the body down into its component parts and creating exercises from that. And from that bodybuilding philosophy, which is essentially where it came from, you can understand how they came to that conclusion. But what I'm doing is I'm sort of, and I don't like using the word because it has certain connotations and stereotypes that come with it, but I look at it from a more holistic way in which the core works, which is not looking at its component parts, but looking at the unit. But I have the reductionist understanding, so I understand that the abdominals can flex the spine, the QL can sort of laterally bend the spine, the obliques can rotate the spine. I understand that, but when you look at it from a holistic view, you start to understand that, well, that doesn't seem to make a great deal of sense with regards to how the whole system works as one. So when we talk about movement, we're talking about the whole system. We're not talking about individual component parts, because when we talk about reductionist, we're talking about muscles. We're not talking about how the body works. We're talking about, in holistic, we're talking about how the body works and movement. And the way the brain, again, I can go off on sort of how the brain works with movement as opposed to reductionist, but I'm going to try and keep it, relatively simple and straightforward for now. So when we look at the core muscles, you've got the rectus abdominis, you've got the obliques, you've got the QL, you've got the erector spinae, you've got the lats that come down as well, you've got the glutes. So you've got all these muscles. Now, altogether, what's their role? It's, number one, it's to maintain proper posture of the spine, certainly under load, which is where we're talking about exercise. So in an exercise environment where load is involved, now load is involved in everyday life, carrying shopping bags, opening doors, so on and so forth. They might just not be as heavy loads. But when we're talking about load, the primary function of the torso is to maintain proper position of the spine and prevent movement. So when we talk about sports performance, we're talking about preventing movement of the spine and allowing the shoulder muscles and the hip muscles to do their job, which is to create movement, because they're the powerful muscles of the spine. So in this sort of holistic idea, in fact, let me just go back and talk about a boxer punching. Where do they generate their power? It's not in the arm. It's in the hips. It's the rotation of the hips. The energy that's produced and the power that's produced gets transferred through the torso, down the arm, and out of the hand. Now, if the pelvis rotates, the spine bends, essentially, and then the shoulders sort of follow, so there's that sort of disconnect, and then the shoulders go, then you have what's known as an energy leak, and you're not going to produce as much power in the punch. It's the same with kicking, throwing. It's all about generating power from the hips, that rotational power, transferring it through the torso, down the arm, and out of the hand or out of the fist or whatever it might be. So when we're in that paradigm, you start to understand the exercises and how to do them is very different. Now, I understand, like in a golf swing, the spine does bend. I understand that. But what we then talk about is the pulsing that happens. So again, in my 12-week program, I'm not necessarily talking about the pulsing as much because we're trying to build the foundation, because the pulsing comes on top of that, which is where sports performance comes in. Because the pulsing, if you look at, say, a golf swing, as the initial lift of the golf club, there is an initial spike in muscle activity. As you go up into the backswing, it relaxes, not completely, but it just sort of tails off. Then as you go to change direction and bring it down from the backswing, you get another pulse. So it's sort of a up, it glides up, and then it's a down, and then it glides through, and then it hits the ball, and it goes again. So there's that pulsing nature to it. And that's where boxing, golfing, kicking, throwing, all of that comes in. but you need the foundation of a properly working core to be able to do that. Because the assumption is, if I've got strong abdominals, strong obliques, and I work them individually, then they're all automatically going to knit together. I'm going to be able to throw further, or punch harder, or kick further, or hit the golf ball further. And that's not necessarily true. The skill of doing those needs to be tuned, and the muscles need to be tuned into that skill. And that's why there's the foundation of building core strength, endurance and stability, and then tuning that core strength, endurance and stability into power, essentially. So with regards to components of fitness, you're building core strength, core stability, core endurance, and then you move into the power settings, the speed and the power, when you're talking about sports performance and more advanced core training. And again, if you go to the core training program through the link below, in the intermediate and advanced workouts where I get the equipment out, that is where I start working on speed and power. So you've basically got the whole journey. You build at the beginning, you build core strength, core stability, core endurance. Then when you get into the intermediate and advanced, you start building the speed and the power to go on top of that, and how to generate it. So with regards to how the core works and any misconceptions, if you're doing spine bending exercises like sit-ups, crunches, back extensions, side bends, twists, you're using that reductionist bodybuilding philosophy. If you're doing planks, side planks, half kneeling exercises, and then moving up into speed and power exercises, you're using a much more holistic approach to core training, which is much more aligned with everyday life, with fitness, and with performance. So it makes much more sense to start doing those types of exercises. Now, the final part is an introduction into the key core muscles. Now, I've talked about them and I've talked about their function, but I just want to, in some respects, just sort of summarize it, because I talked a lot in the misconceptions about it. So essentially, the key core muscles, and I'll keep this as brief as I can, the key core muscles, rectus abdominis and obliques. So they are what is known as the abdominal wall. You then have transverse abdominis below that. Now, that is not an effective exercise to train because it's one piece in a much greater system. So we need to start thinking about the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, because the parts is the bodybuilding bit that I described before. So we have rectus abdominis, or the abs, or the six-pack, or whatever, the obliques, transverse abdominis. Then we have the QL, which is much more effectively trained when you do carries. Then you have the erector spinae group. Then you have latissimus dorsi. Now, latissimus dorsi is a very important muscle because it joins to a tissue called the thoracolumbar fascia, which is, again, if you look at the reductionist part, it's just one part of a greater whole, because you've got all the abdominal fascia, which is essentially connected to it, because you've got layers. So it's like connected layers on the inside that sort of grow outwards. But that creates tension. So if you contract your lats and you contract your glutes, you are essentially creating tension throughout the thoracolumbar fascia, which is then stabilizing the low back, which is working with longissimus and iliocostalis, the two main erector spinae muscles, which stabilize the lower back. So when you get all of those muscles working together, you start to stabilize the lower back. When you then introduce the abdominal wall, the obliques, and the rectus abdominis, you bring sort of the front part of that. What then that starts to happen is you then start creating what is known as intra-abdominal pressure, because these muscles are contracting inwards. So they're essentially sort of trying to squeeze down upon. But what you've then got is the force trying to push out. And so you've got two forces, one pushing out, one pushing in. They need to equalize. That's your intra-abdominal pressure, and that creates what is known as hoop stresses. And it's the hoop stresses that create and give you the core strength. So if you've just got one strong muscle, you're not strong. If you've got a whole unit that is working together, that is tuned, as I described, then you've got a proper working core. So it's very important to move away from this paradigm of breaking the body down into its muscles and then having exercises for that. It's much more important to work the core as one unit and then say, here is the unit, how does that work? And then you have the exercises and then the workouts that come off the back of that. And that is exactly what the 12-week program is below, and the intermediate and advanced workouts, because the 12-week program is the strength, the endurance, and the stability. The intermediate and advanced is taking those three to another level and then introducing speed and power into it. So hopefully this has been helpful for you. Hopefully it's given you a better understanding of my philosophy, how I believe the core works, if you will, based on what I've talked about, based on that holistic sports, performance, fitness, anatomy, perception of how the body works. And then hopefully it's given you enough confidence to go about signing up to the program, because you've got a little bit more of an understanding of what you're going to be doing, when you're going to be doing it, how you're going to be doing it, the types of exercises that you're going to be doing as well. So many thanks for watching. Hopefully it's been helpful. Hopefully it's given you a better understanding of how the core works. So many thanks for watching. My name is Chris. I'll speak to you in the next episode.